Hi everyone, I'm Jason,
And I'm Sam,
and we are.
the Autodidacts.
So today we're going to be looking at the Robot Revolution, which is episode 1 of the second season of Doctor Who. So let's have a look at what we thought about it. So what was your sort of, if we were to say overarchingly, what did you think? Was it good? Was it bad? What sort of where would you rate it?
I would say I thought it was really good at being an opening episode for a series.
Yeah,
And one of the things that, when I was looking at other people's discussions on it, is that a lot of people that at least win the more supportive side of the reviewing world, reviewing world of Doctor Who,
yeah,
was that they generally seemed to think it was a better series opener than the Space Babies. That's something that I saw quite a lot of.
yeah,
And one of the things that's interesting though with both of them is that the most common criticism that I think you could actually, yeah, you could to some degree level at them both as an actual criticism is that they both had a lot going on and tended to not really have enough space to breathe as episodes.
yeah.
That's what I've seen as the general criticism of both of them, and I think for both of them you can make that criticism.
Yeah, there were times I've got in my notes somewhere to say it felt rushed at times, and there were certain things that I
Yeah,
think could have done with a few more scenes, and
yeah,
the Doctor was still a little bit lacking to a certain extent in it at parts as
yeah,
well. Not him as a character or Shooty as an actor, but just that I could have done with a few more scenes with the Doctor being the
yeah.
Doctor in it.
Because I know one of the things that I was listening to earlier today actually is to sort of see what other people's thoughts were. Not because I depend on other people's thoughts, but more just because I wanted to see what other people were thinking, and other people who I knew were not just going to go, "Oh God, it's work,"
Yeah,
all that nonsense.
I think we need to
Um,
get out of the way really quickly that we don't sit on that it's woke
yes, we don't subscribe to
situation.
that theory.
Yes,
And one of the criticisms that I thought again was an interesting way of couching it was that uh, with the whole bit of the episode where the Doctor basically spent, with the time fracture, spends 6 months on the planet ahead of her,
yeah,
Glinda. Uh, One of the criticisms I heard was that they thought that that whole element of the story should have worked a lot more like the Crimson Horror, where it's the case that the Doctor is found to be in Victorian Yorkshire rather than it being ooh the doctor finds a miscreant and goes there. So that was one of the things that I thought would have been a way of approaching that might have actually helped
I
with
think
the
if
story.
they'd have maybe again because of the running time being only at 43 minutes or
Yeah,
something that this one was. I think if they'd
yeah,
have just had another
yeah,
5 minutes, they could have
yeah,
potentially have set up because I think
yeah,
it made me not care so much about Sasha when Sasha was
yeah,
killed, and I think had they just had a few minutes of sort of showing what the
yeah,
Doctor had been doing, even if
yeah.
we
I
didn't
think
know what it was that he was doing, we knew he was there, and
yeah,
we'd have already known that, and it wouldn't have needed to be explained later
yeah,
as much.
yeah. I was gonna say I still thought it worked relatively well. I
Yeah,
think it would just been a lot stronger if you had something there to build that up.
yeah. I think we're both on the same page with anything that was added to it would have made it better, not that it's
Yeah,
worse
it's
because it wasn't there. If
yeah,
that makes
it's
sense.
not yeah, it's more a case of it's it's positive criticism is where I tend to phrase it, which is where you're not criticizing something to pull it down, you're wanting to push it up.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because I think we both feel that way about this episode. Because I think when we watched
Yeah,
it, because I watched it at 8 in the morning, and you watched it when it was
yes.
six
Whereas I
when it was
watched it
on.
at the traditional airtime as it goes for Doctor Who viewers.
So I think I messaged you something along the lines of it's silly, it's fun, and it's going to annoy the misogynists, which is a bonus.
So, yes.
But and that's kind of how I saw it. I saw it as a very silly At the same time, it was a very serious episode, but it felt very fun.
yeah,
It felt very.
yeah,
I don't know. It just was a bit like a romp. It wasn't too
yeah. It was very.
serious.
I was gonna say. One person said it felt very camp with the what was his name, Manny,
Yeah,
the rather muscly rebel figure dropping out of the room.
Manny's on my list of of my characters to talk about, which is kind of what I was going to sort of touch on next. Is
Yeah,
now we're sort of like, I mean, where I would rank it, it's one of the better. Well, I would say it's one of the better starting episodes that we've had in
yeah,
Doctor Who, New Who.
yeah,
Probably in the top five of those, because I thought it introduced Belinda really well. It brought us back into the world of
yeah,
Doctor Who really quickly, and because of
yeah,
the campiness and the campy sci-fi
yeah,
thing was quite
because
interesting. But it also brought elements of other things, because you had kind of season 10 echoes with the robots that had the emojis
yeah,
on.
because this is something that we'll get into later, but a lot of it I thought was very meta and very deja vu.
Yeah,
But that's something we'll get onto later because I think that there's a level of intentionality there which most people don't seem to have picked up on when I've been looking at people talking about it. Like
yeah, agreed.
it doesn't seem like there's a lot of referencing going on to things in the past and in a
Yeah,
not very subtle way, and it seems
very
to
obvious to
be
me as well.
yeah,
But
I think
go on, sorry.
that yeah, from what you're saying, it was quite obvious to you, but I don't think I've seen anyone else really sort of mention
No, me neither.
like there's lots of elements in it where it's looking like it's very been playing very meta with its narrative, which
Um,
could be indicating something which is in Doctor Who's history for those people who know, particularly a certain story from the 1960s. That's all I'll say for now before we get into that. But you were talking about characters and
Characters, so just kind of like an overarching our thought
yeah,
process on the characters. So on that, with the
yeah,
robots, what did you think of the robots
yeah.
as they were done, as a concept, the way that they were?
Well, like one of the things that I had heard, because I haven't seen them released, but I've heard comments around it, is that it turns out that the robots were entirely practical and were 3D printed,
Yeah,
which I didn't realise. It explains why they looked as good as they did,
yeah, yeah. They did. They looked
and
very real, which obviously that's the reason why.
and I thought the robots as an idea were quite clever in that uh, because obviously they take their orders from the AI generator, although it's not AI.
Yeah,
Because that was one thing that I saw people criticising it for. I was like, it's not really criticising AI. And it's like it's not meant to be criticising AI. It's
no.
actually a joke.
Well, I would argue it does slightly criticise AI, but I'll get to that in a second when we
Yeah.
get to the AI generator, or
Well,
AL.
yeah. Yeah. I was gonna
um,
say I don't think it's AI as in a concept is
no,
the main thing it's criticising. It's
no, no,
more
definitely not. It's a side
human
note.
in
It's a
its
side
AI.
note.
Yeah, it's more of a it's more of an element of the thing rather than the thing itself.
I think it's meant to be
Uh,
sort of saying. I think it's meant to be criticising the people who've created AI rather
yeah,
than
that's
AI
what that was.
itself.
Yeah, that was what I took from it because uh, I think the way when it comes to characters, the way it works best is that uh, like any good Doctor Who opening story should do, uh, it focuses on one character and mainly seeing it through that person's
Yeah,
viewpoint. In this case, it's Belinda.
yeah,
And one of the things that most people, even those who called it woke, seem to agreed on is that Belinda as a character was done very well.
yeah, definitely. And I think the
Yeah.
robots were very much about. So I think I need to sort of sort of say what I think about it. To be able to sort of say what the robots are. I've just realised this. I have to sort of talk about what I think the overarching thought process is, which I think is very clear. It was very on the nose that it's very much about coercive control, and
Yeah.
it was the robots were showing that nobody mattered but Belinda, but actually Belinda herself didn't matter. So when
Yeah.
the robot kills the cat, for
Yes.
instance, the cat is irrelevant because was making a point. I'm going to kill this cat to make a point that you need to come with
Yeah.
me, and I have power over you.
Yeah.
But they seemed very relatively pleasant, even though they weren't that
Yeah.
pleasant.
It's
But it was like calling
yeah.
her Your Majesty at the same time as threatening her, which is a very
Yeah.
coercive control
Well,
thing.
it's like I kind of well, that's just me thought. Like, given what you were saying about the AI element of it, I think the robots are kind of meant to represent people on the internet,
Yeah, yeah,
whereas it's like probably nice people in real life, but then they have this persona that's actually quite dark.
yeah.
But the online world, I think that's probably what it is.
There were lots of different themes going on at the same time.
Yeah, I mean that's a big part of it. But uh, yeah, I think outside of Belinda wants to go to characters tend to be a lot smaller in depth in a sense, if that makes sense, because of the viewpoint.
Yeah. Because with Manny for me was interesting because of his name.
Yeah,
Obviously, that was a little bit on the
yeah.
nose.
Because
Go on, sorry.
my first thought when he first appeared was, oh, is it going to be a thing of they're going to try and overthrow the robots, and then he becomes this massive incel with his name being Manny and him being this big butch
Yeah.
man.
But he kept blaming Belinda for everything. And
Yes,
I think that
that's
was meant to be another man
Yeah.
blaming
Yeah, I
the
think
woman, even though she had nothing to do with any of it.
yeah, and so I'm going back to the whole dot and bubble thing as well. I think that's. Ooh, but there's loads of ways of referencing loads of other stories. Kind of like there's a whole point to this referencing of loads of other stories.
And then there's obviously Al in general as a character,
Yes.
or Alan as a character.
Yeah.
And for me, go on, sorry.
Yeah, because he's the character which when looking at how people have reacted to it, it's really quite interesting because it's going back to that thing I was saying to you when you were first like sent me that screenshot of, I believe it was the Telegraph's review of Robot Revolution, where it's like good but preachy kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think was the title, something like that. And a lot of people's reaction to it seems to be, oh, it was too simple. You can't do incels that simple. It should have been something that should have gone into a lot more detail and that. And I actually saw one person saying it should have been done over 5 episodes. Like, you are aware that this is Doctor Who and not a TV drama miniseries about the problems of modern men.
As much as people have said that it was on the nose, I think some things like saying obviously the planet of the incels and the coercive control taking over the planet.
And for me, one of the things that people were saying was at the very beginning when Alan is giving her the star certificate, it just appears a bit socially awkward, and I think this is a man thing because as soon as I saw him, I thought, run away and run far. So I think it's more of a man thing of not understanding maybe women's reaction to men, because this is something that, again, I think with me having 2 sisters who have talked to me many times about how there's very different experiences for men and women in relationships.
Yeah.
Because I think it was one time when I was in London with my twin sister who lives down there,
Mm-hmm.
and she was saying that she always finds it uncomfortable. She's fine with it, but she always finds it uncomfortable walking alone at night.
Yeah.
And
I don't think there's some men that don't see that, and there's some do, some don't. But
yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of the people's reactions to this kind of shows that, because again with the whole story it is very much, and whilst there are scenes with the Doctor initially, after that it's very much anchored in Belinda's viewpoint.
Yeah.
And I think you kind of have to understand that it's coming from her viewpoint in order to actually make sense of it all. Because I have to say, for an episode that is rather simple and straightforward, got a lot of complicated things going on in it plot-wise, with like the time fracture and all the timey whininess, sounding like a 6-year-old. Get that reference in there. It is actually a really simple story.
The story itself is really simple. It's just got a lot of messaging in it that I think you really do have to look deeper on. And one of the things that I think happened in relation to when he was revealed, it was very clear
Yeah.
that when she was saying about the fact you've turned coercive control into basically a rule or ruling people, it's not exactly how
Yeah.
she worded it, but I think that's trying to make a very big dig at a certain thing that's going on in America at the moment, in that
Yes.
this is the kind of behaviour of these people, and
Yeah.
she's saying that how can you hurt people? Why? How can you do that to people and it not hurt you? And he says it is. That's when the doctor then says it is, and then says that he's, for all intents
And
and
then
purposes, the
because
machine's covering it up.
Yeah, because another one of the things on a technical level I have heard people criticise is that the whole every ninth word is basically him saying the truth, and then the rest of it is the machine, as it were.
Yeah.
And I've heard people say that apparently if you go back and that doesn't actually work here, right? It's like every ninth word, it isn't. That doesn't actually work.
It doesn't work with his no. When you actually go back to what he says, I noticed that there's times where that definitely doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But it's quite interesting on that. I mean, this is on one of the lists that I have in my things to talk about the themes. But that would be, I think that's trying to, the whole point of the ninth word is a coding situation, which a lot of people who are in coercive relationships will find a way of coding to speak to their family.
Because I also thought that was a reference, again, on the AI side of things, to social media and word count limits and things like that on social media interactions. Again, like I always just assumed it was that. I was like, yes, don't. And again, it's one of those things where don't take it literally.
No, exactly.
We are dealing with a story form which is known as mythopoetics, which basically everything is a form of metaphor in mythopoetics. Do not read it literally. Otherwise, you become like a certain group of people who are known as religious fundamentalists who have no sense of humour and tend to be rather dull and boring.
Yes. The last character there, because I mean, the Doctor I'm sure we'll talk just generally about the Doctor, so I don't want to talk about the Doctor as a character. It's too big. I was
going to say the Doctor doesn't really do that much character-wise. He's just more there to introduce you to him as a character more than actually have a lot going on. Although one of the things that a lot of people did say is that, particularly at the end scene, is actually the Doctor being coercive and controlling.
I think that was meant to be. I think that was meant to be on purpose.
And I think that was meant to be. I think
it was meant to be the saviour complex of come in, I save you, and now I'm going to unintentionally treat you the same way you've already been treated.
Yeah, but also I'm going to give you, look, here's all this meaning that I can give you as well, which is how any kind of system of thought works into people's minds. Here is this piece of meaning that I can give you that will stabilise your life and give you a whole sense of purpose and orientation to the wider world.
And I think it's meant to also indicate that you might think you're the nice guy, but you might not actually be the nice guy you think you are, or you might not be to that person that you're talking to. And I think that's kind of what that relationship between Belinda and him is going to be, because it's not as sweet and lovely and nice as it was with Ruby. There's definitely conflict there, which we'll get into a second. I just want to touch on one little thing that I think was the best character in all of it, the polish robot. I think he was the they were. Obviously I'm gendering a robot, but one really important character, because eventually ended up passing the star certificate over, but was just hilarious the whole way through it. And when we talk about camp, definitely a camp addition to the but also having metaphor within it.
Yeah, and also having the bit where it polishes up the sperm in the egg.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, because again, with this episode in particular, and particularly with everything surrounding and people's reaction towards Alan generally, it's like that thing I was saying to you, where generally most people's views on Doctor Who tell you more about the person viewing Doctor Who than Doctor Who itself.
Yeah.
Because Doctor Who has always been very straightforward. It's always been very humanistic in its outlook on things. That can mean it looks awful to people who tend to be more right-wing minded at times. It can also be that some people who are left-wing minded don't like it at times. We were talking about it the other day, and I said there's plenty of episodes where if you have very strong left-wing ideals, you can very easily tell if that person if they are a Doctor Who reviewer, has very strong left-wing viewpoints because they will be very critical of certain episodes and they could have done it this way and this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
So Doctor Who will always be ahead of people's politics, and you'll always be able to tell people's politics from watching from what they think of Doctor Who.
Yeah, and it always has been right from the beginning. So from an actual episode, sort of, don't want to go through it scene by scene or anything, but I found you kind of touched on this, and I suppose maybe this is the bit where we talk about what you said, which was where there were sort of echoes of the past in it, and there's a lot of metaphor in it. But for me, just on that, the opening felt very much like Smith and Jones.
Yes, and that's like immediately like, I just feel like I've got chronological whiplash here.
So,
like, apparently the Doctor knows about Belinda from someone, and that's why he's there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's everything that, particularly with Belinda herself, pretty much all of the elements around her, as a character, are all referencing back to other characters, like with Boom last year, where there was Mandy Flynn.
Yeah.
As soon as I said, "Oh yeah, she's playing a different character," no, it's going to come back because whenever you have an actor who returns in Doctor Who as another character, it's always linked back somehow to the first time they appeared, which if you're looking at companions is a very clever thing.
Yeah.
Who is this impossible girl?
Yeah.
Thing. Also, the whole "I don't want to be here" that references back to loads of companions. Most famously, probably Tegan with the Fifth Doctor.
Yeah.
Of the mouthy Australian who wanted to get back to Heathrow Airport. And then going all the way back to 1963 with Ian and Barbara, where the Doctor kidnaps two school teachers.
Yes, and they really don't want to be there at the beginning, and then end up really liking it and enjoying it. But even down to the robots, as I mentioned before, the robots were you've got the emoji thing, but also very, very similar to the Jadoon in the way that they came in, as they do in the hospital. I felt the way they interacted, the way they speak was very similar to that, and I think even to the extent of them, the cat again, as much as I think that was sort of making the point in relation to not caring and Belinda being the most important, and therefore everything else is irrelevant and nothing matters. It still goes back again to that episode, that episode where I've forgotten what the creature's called, but the one that sucks the blood out of somebody. She basically says, that's it. So she basically says that person isn't relevant. So there's a lot of that there as well. So there's a lot to that episode, but there was also, like you say, there were things that were sort of going back to all sorts of other. And I think this is where I've said it felt quite rushed at the beginning as well. I felt like that was quite rushed. Yeah,
that seems to be a quite common criticism of this era generally, is that the episodes themselves are throwing a lot in there and not really having enough time to breathe.
Yeah,
that seems to be a common criticism across this. That does seem to be sticking so far.
Yeah,
that's not. And again, because it probably took me longer than you to sort of click with this era and what it was doing.
Yeah,
but I always thought the episodes themselves were good. I was just like, I just need to sort of gel with it.
Yeah, and I think it's a struggle to put them, because especially in the first series they seemed like cellular episodes, and I could see that they weren't, but I couldn't see where they all fit. And I think I've got it to an extent, but I still don't think I've got it all. But I do. The pacing it's a bit complicated because of the runtime of the episodes, as making it quite difficult to mete out characters as much as you'd want them to, or storylines to be. And I don't think it'd take much more time. It would be minutes extra. Would be what it would take.
Generally speaking, most Doctor episodes that even outside of the series that tend to feel a bit rushed. Most often when I've seen that criticism level is like, most time it just seems to need like a lot of it is just, it just needs another 5 minutes or so, and it would stabilise it out. Because quite often, what seems to be the thing that ends up either, if it is longer and being cut, or what it needs to have into basically make it balance out
Yeah.
pace wise, is actually moments where it's just allowed to breathe.
Yeah.
Where you're not ex- expositing anything. Get the
Yeah.
word right. I almost said exposing anything. uh, and you're not moving the narrative on. You're just there having two people interact.
Yeah. So there was one of the things I noticed as well. This is kind of jumping about because I'm going towards the end of the episode again. But when the certificates crossed over and there was that
Yeah,
strange
yeah,
sort of fracture in time that happened,
yeah,
and the doctor then says to her that he's known her for a long time. I just feel like he's now in her timeline, and it felt a little
yeah,
bit like the Impossible Girl again, but in a different
yeah,
way, but touching on a very similar.
yeah. Because another thing that a lot of people did say, and I thought this at the time when I was watching as well, is that it's reminiscent of a scene in The Three Doctors where the Doctor and Omega have a mental fist fight for all intents and purposes, where in Third Doctor style, they have a good old punch up.
Yeah,
Except it's in each other's minds that they have it, and
and if
that's meant to be that's where that was filmed was very similar.
and if he has been put in her timeline, that could answer something that's really baffled me, and I've watched it 3 times now. And how did she know it was called the TARDIS?
Yes. Yeah.
So that was really confusing because the first time
Yeah.
I didn't pick up on it so much the first time, and then I noticed she
Yeah.
said it, but I thought he must have said it, and I missed it. And the second time I specifically listened for it, couldn't see it, I couldn't hear it, and then the third time I pretty much watched it to see whether that was the case. So no,
Yeah.
he does not say at any point that his ship's called the TARDIS. So um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's definitely part of the equation is that she knows that
Yeah.
without saying it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I hadn't thought of that until you said it. Like, oh yeah, of course. But because looking at the wider series now,
Yeah,
I think partly because as I've sort of found my way with the tone of it all now and I've sort of gelled with it,
yeah,
I'll probably uh, be far better with this series than the last series. But one of the things I have noticed a lot of people already saying is that uh, with the dynamic being quite different this time, in that you've got a companion who's basically implied to be early 30s,
yeah,
rather than someone who's just out of just coming out of teenage years.
yeah,
You've got a much more different dynamic towards
yeah,
the Doctor, whereas the first one is all very friendly, and whereas this one is probably going to be more confrontational, or at least I'm hoping it'll be more confrontational.
yeah,
And I think that's something where, for me, I think going through the second series, it might help things along better because you have a bit more of a bit more of a complex dynamic
yeah,
between Doctor and companion.
yeah, definitely. I think that Belinda is definitely a strong character, but she also doubts herself at times as well. So she's very
Yes.
strong.
That's
She's very human in the way that she is
yeah,
being portrayed. Whereas I suppose when you look back at Ruby, yes, there was a lot of fear from Ruby and worriedness and that
yeah,
type of thing, but there wasn't that. I think we even mentioned this a few times that she seemed a bit one-dimensional at times, and I think that's been a criticism
yeah,
of her as a character. But I don't think it. Again, I
yeah,
don't think it's a Millie Gibson thing. I think it was just kind of
yeah,
impossible to do.
yeah. And I know we were talking about this last time we spoke about how there's going to be like how in the first series is that I think it's in the Devil's Code it mentions how they've been traveling together for 6 months and it's like oh it's the second episode
Yeah,
and I think that's probably going to be trying to sort of not fix the issue but sort of develop out that issue.
well, the thing is, this was recorded. This series was recorded
Yeah,
before Series 1 aired. So
yeah, even,
I think
yeah,
it was all of what we think is complicated about the first series and doesn't make sense. I think will make sense
yeah,
because it was always in Russell
yeah,
T Davis's head
yeah, because
to rectify it.
yeah, because if I'm remembering correctly, uh, series 2 started filming at the time that the Star Beast went out.
Yes, I
It
believe
was in
so.
Ed. Yeah, so
So what do we
that's
think
something.
about the Mrs. Flood being her neighbour?
I think it's sort of very, how do you put it? Probably the most on the nose way of saying there's meta things going on here, please pay attention.
Yeah.
We are deliberately repeating a plot element from the last series.
So do you think, from what you know of Mrs. Flood already and what we kind of have seen,
Yeah,
I'm not going to ask who she is because I think anything at the moment is still a wild guess on who she is. What
yeah.
I am going to ask is, do you think she is a villain or she is a is she an antagonist or a protagonist?
Ooh, interesting. I think, and I'm going to play an annoying answer here. I think she's neither. I
Okay.
think she's probably a bit of an opportunist in that might have her own little things going on. Kind of suppose, put it this way, a bit like Captain Jack in the beginning. If you remember back to the Empty Cloud and the Doctor's Answers,
Yeah.
uh, Captain Jack isn't someone who's out to cause all these issues for World War Two time London.
Yeah.
Is someone who's calling people, and I think, and like from just if you go back to the Legend of Ruby Sunday when Mrs. Flood is talking to Kerry, a lot of it, the dialogue can sound kind of menacing,
Yeah.
and so I think he's someone who might have schemes going on, but to put it in a more animal framework, uh, she's not the biggest. She's not the biggest predator in the sea. Put it that way. I think so. I think a lot. I think there might be a meta thing around. She's someone who has her own plans, which at best probably neutral.
Yeah.
So as in not bad, not good, just there sort of thing, like oh beyond good and evil kind of thing.
Yeah.
Uh, but you've got all these other deities out there which are far more powerful and basically can just rock up and ruin whatever plan you have, kind of thing. I think that might be where it's going to go with her because, as regards to what she is, again, could be anything, but just because of how Shakespearean as a character she is, where there's so much direct speak going on,
Yeah.
where it's like turn to face the audience and do all of your internal monologuing to us, which part of the reason uh, why I mentioned to you the Caves of Angvadani the other day is not because, well, it's two reasons. Partly because Alan, in some ways, reminded me of one of the villains in that story called Chavez Gek, who was inspired by the Phantom of the Opera.
Hmm.
Uh, but also because there's a character, the actually arguable main villain of the story is a very much a Donald Trump slash Jeff Bezos kind of character, but rather than being a pantomime villain, is this absolutely insanely dark character where it's like just goes around happy to murder people as long as it gives him an advantage kind of thing.
Yeah.
And most of his dialogue again is done in direct speech towards the audience. So I just thought it's one of the few times where direct speech has been used in Doctor Who before.
Yeah.
But my general thoughts with Mrs. Flood is that she might be the mistress of the land of fiction. That's what I'm thinking, just because there's so much there around being very metatextual, where I'm talking to the audience,
Yeah.
and it seems like, and because in the '60s it was the master of the land of fiction, and it just seems like a quite easy way to reinvent it to be not the master of the land of fiction, but the mistress of the land of fiction.
I mean, it does fit, and you know that I agree with that's possibly
Yeah,
a big possibility, especially with the end of Empire of Death, where she Again,
Yeah.
speaks to camera and is basically saying
Yeah.
this story is done, but but the Doctor's story is going
Yeah.
to end in terror.
And the fact that she seems to be wearing a lot of uh, clothing that is inspired by past Doctor Who companions as well.
Yeah,
Like Empire of Death takes after Romana 1 if you're going down the
yeah,
various incarnations of Romana. Then I think, I want to say, is it Legend of Ruby Sunday where she's wearing a lot of clothes that resemble Clara?
like Clara, yeah,
And
which would make sense with
yeah,
one of
things
the
like that.
things that I'm thinking about, and I think this does make sense. She's that maybe she has always been the next door neighbor of all of the
Yeah,
companions and therefore is
yeah,
somehow guiding the Doctor's story
yeah,
by being always there around the companion.
yeah,
Bearing in mind, Russell T Davies always has to make companions, or not just Russell T Davies, the new era. The
yeah,
companions are a very big, important part of the Doctor's
yeah.
destiny.
And
So
yeah,
it could be that the reason why that has been the case is because
yeah.
the flood's
Yeah.
coming.
It does make some companion. It works with most companions. It does make the whole kind of Clara thing more rather interesting because in her it's kind of weirdly set up that it's kind of like the master going, "You two are perfect for each other, and I want to see what kind of damage you do to the universe,"
Yeah.
kind of things. That could be actually a whole interesting thing that goes on later down the line because uh, looking at the wider series,
Yeah,
I think we both probably agree it's very much going down a land of fiction sort of route.
yeah, definitely.
And uh, then and with what is your theory for the series is we've kind of alluded to the fact that we think there's a lot going on regarding land of fiction and whatnot.
Yeah, so I definitely agree on the fact that's definitely how much it's what it feels like with Mrs. Flood is definitely that's where it's going, and I felt that kind of for a long time, and certainly after the end
Yeah,
of Empire of Death. I feel like so I don't necessarily know where it's definitely going to go. I think all of the gods
mm,
that were mentioned by Harriet in the Legend of Ruby Sunday, I think all of those gods are going to be present in this series. I don't know where they'll
yeah,
sit. I definitely think that
yeah,
Interstellar is going to have the gods of Ragnarok, and that's going to be part of it.
yeah,
But I think all of those gods are going to be there. But my actual overarching thought of what Russell T Davies is doing with this series is quite
mm,
complex. In that I feel like he feels like he's going to have to burn it all down and start again. And I think that
mm,
for me, even in the name of the last two episodes being Wish World and being
mm,
the Reality War, I think that it's kind of implying that everybody wants everything their own way, and from a
mm.
metaphorical perspective, so
Yeah,
everybody's getting the wish that they want, and the reality war is the inevitable sort of conclusion of everybody getting what they want
yeah,
is everyone's going to be fighting over their reality. And I think those two episodes
mm,
being next to each other, I think metaphorically it's about that. I don't think that's going to be outwardly what it is, but I
yeah,
think he kind of wants to burn it all down because of how toxic things have got in relation to
mm,
the woke culture side of things and people
yeah,
saying it's woke. I think he would rather burn it all down at the moment and go, we're going to do this regardless. And I think that's going to be
yeah,
from a meta perspective, that's what he's doing with it.
yeah,
But I just think I think it's going to be very pantheon based all the way through it, and I think the Doctor's going
yeah,
to have something revealed about his origins, which has kind of been confirmed. But I
yeah,
think he's going to have more to do with this than he realizes. Is basically what I think. But I'm not
yeah,
going to
because
nail anything down yet on what I think that's going to be. But I definitely think Mrs.
yeah,
Flood is going to be somebody who's weaving a story, and I think that's why we've got the Anansi situation. I think that's going to play
mm,
into it as well.
yeah,
So,
because
what are your thoughts on it? What's your theory?
I definitely think that there's going to be something around the Doctor that's going to be revealed because I know there was a lot of stuff last time out, stuff about the Doctor being maybe revealed in Empire of Death, and in the end there wasn't really that much there.
Yeah,
Which I know a lot of people kind of sort of wanting something to reveal, but because I know when we were talking about it the other day, you were saying that you were thinking it might be something around Omega would be the finale. I was on the same path, and even whilst I was watching the Robot Revolution, but as I thought about it afterwards, I don't think it's going to be Omega, but I'll circle back to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Because, again, I think it's going to be very sort of playing on the whole fictional side of things. And I think, Interstellar Song Contest is going to be Gods of Ragnarok.
Yeah.
And then I think Wish World will introduce the trickster along with, reintroduce the trickster along with the other more minor deities.
Yeah.
Because have you ever seen anything which has the trickster in it?
Yes.
Good. Because the whole way the trickster tends to work is by appearing to people at their most desperate moment and saying, I can offer you this. And basically, almost like a wishes come true kind of thing.
Yeah.
Situation, but then ends up messing up reality.
Yeah.
And normally, the doctors are able to stop it before it all goes to hell.
Yeah.
And I think Wish World is going to be the case of that basically doesn't happen and the world goes to hell.
Yeah.
But I think behind all of it is going to be Fenric.
Okay.
Yeah,
that
have
makes sense.
Have you seen the Curse of Fenric?
I haven't seen it, but I have read about it, so I know I know the concept of Fenric.
Yeah, because Fenric has done a lot of things around manipulating time, like manipulating time storms and things like that, which is, as soon as I was looking back, I was like, oh, there's a time fracture.
Yeah.
That seems more Fenric-y than Omega. Omega tends to be more antimatter kind of things. And so the way I think it's going to go is that the sort of big bad of the series, as it were, is going to be Fenric.
Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable.
And I think that the Unholy Trinity is probably going to be named, but they're not going to appear. So you'll find out who the other is, the father and the mother.
Yeah. Yeah, I think...
But I don't think you'll see them. I think they'll only appear probably at Series 4, maybe Series 5.
Yeah.
I do have a theory about where this all, as an entire era, sort of ends.
Yeah.
Which, to me, it seems like it's probably going to come down to kind of, to use Norse mythology. I think with the reality what's going to kind of be revealed that essentially there's a multiverse where you have different universes and certain gods living in certain universes and others live in others. So you have the Toymaker and his family living in one domain. Yeah. You have, say, the Beast living in another, and and again, whilst it's inspired by Norse mythology, I don't think it's going to be a direct copy of it.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a way of putting things together that nicely fits within the already established continuities. A nice way of just basically bringing it all together in a quite neat and cohesive way.
Yeah, it can bring pretty much all of these storylines that have kind of been left throughout the whole 60 years of it, because there have been. Even in the classic era, there was still storylines that weren't finished off, and you can kind of finish that all off by doing this, by making a pantheon of gods that are in charge of everything. And I think one of the things that people maybe sort of will find problematic is that because people have always said the Doctor was never this big thing. He was meant to just be a normal living being that just happened to be able to do things. I don't actually buy that. That isn't how he is. You don't have the power to regenerate.
No, and I think part of the problem is that people are never, with the Doctor, never seem to be able to sort of put two things together, which is that is this very mysterious being. Yeah. But he also appears to be just like an average person. Like that's his, and I think people can't separate attitude from what something is. Yeah. Like you can, like for example, you can theoretically have someone who's from very high up in society, but in the way they present themselves, could present as someone who's very low in society. Yeah, that's a similar sort of way of framing it. But if you go back to the first appearance of the Time Lords, the way they appear is quite like as gods, where basically time stops working. at the end of the war games, basically. And again, using the whole Norse mythology kind of allegory that I've built up, I think the way that the Time Lords will fit into it is they are kind of a bit like the Aesir and the Vanir in Norse mythology,
Yeah.
where it's basically like almost Gallifrey is basically Asgard
Yeah.
in a sense, which would make sense because the whole thing in Asgard is that you can travel from Asgard to all the different realms.
Yeah. And I have just thought of something about where the Doctor may fit into, if he is the other, as if the Doctor is part of the pantheon in general. But we now know that the ability to regenerate came from the Doctor. Would he not be the god of rebirth?
Yes, which that's interesting because one of the things that's quite interesting with the Doctor is if you're looking at parallels with Norse gods, the two most obvious are Odin and Loki.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also, given what you were saying then about rebirth, that would also be Freya.
Yes.
Who is the Norse goddess of fertility and life, essentially. So that's just another interesting element. Again, both male and female represented deities being embodied in a single character. But anyway, so moving on from the whole Nine Realms-esque style of multiverse framing, I think the way that all this era is going to come to a head is in a Ragnarok style situation, partly because in the way it's been passed down, Ragnarok itself, there's quite a few deities in it that, if outright are not outright borderline copied into Doctor Who, very similar match. Like, for example, Fenric, all you need to do is change the C to an R and you have Fenrir, the wolf of Norse mythology.
Yeah.
And you then have Jormungandr, who is the world serpent that is wrapped around the earth, kind of like how Susek was wrapped around the TARDIS, winky winky, could be the Mara, which possesses people.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Surt in Ragnarok, who is a fire giant. And there, it could be two things. It could be the Pyrovils, but I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Or more likely, it's the Beast. Because the Beast breathes fire and things like that. I think that's more likely. And so I think you're going to end up with a situation like that where it's involving a lot of the gods and basically Earth starting to be destroyed. Actually brings me back to the whole idea of how you could reinvent Fenric for the modern day, and it would also link in with the Robot Revolution, is that in The Curse of Fenric, the servants of Fenric are known as the Wolves of Fenric.
Right.
And going back into Viking society, you had the greatest warriors of the Vikings were the Berserkers, who would essentially get high on drugs and pretend they were wolves and bears and all kinds of animal nonsense. And given that a lot of Norse mythology has been co-opted by the hyper-masculine-esque elements of the right, it again is sort of one of the things where it'd be very easy to transplant all of this into Doctor Who, where you have the Wolves of Fenric as being these uber-masculine men.
So yeah, I think this whole era is going to be a matter of, I think, like I say, it's going to make a point. It's definitely making points, and I think the reason why people are getting peed off by it is because of the fact those points have been made. And I think they think that for some reason Russell T Davies and Disney are going to go, oh well, we're not going to be woke anymore. Not that word means anything anyway. But that's not really what they don't care about it, because that's kind of the point.
Yeah, and another thing is that I'm seeing a lot of people sort of complain about viewing figures, like how I think on the night it was viewed by 2 million people and wasn't even necessarily like the most watched thing on BBC One. But most people, when looking at viewing figures today, as corporations, do not look at it on the night.
No.
It is pretty much worthless looking at something on the night in this day and age. They tend to only really bother about its entirely accumulated viewing numbers.
That's 2 million people that watched it like you did, basically. That's it. So that still doesn't count me, because I watched it on iPlayer at 8 o'clock in the morning. So if loads of people did that, and then you've got the whole of the Disney Plus people that will have watched it, it's not it's not as bad as people think it is. And I
Yeah.
think more people will have watched it at 8 a.m. than people that watched it at midnight
Yeah.
last time. I think I think it being 8 a.m.
Yeah.
means that people are more likely to watch it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know as well that I think at the end of series one they said that uh, a lot of the viewing figures aren't that much of a problem because the main thing they wanted was more younger people watching it, which is what had happened.
Yeah. So people keep complaining about viewing figures, and it just shows that they're not part of the demographic that they're actually aiming it at because they're focusing on something that's now archaic.
Yeah, it's basically people not being able to read data or how to read data for the modern world, essentially.
Yeah.
Looking at data as if it's the 2000s, which is what a lot of people tend to be doing with most things at the moment, wanting to go back to the 2000s just before everything started to change.
Yes, before we started to have to actually accept people rather than pretend that we accepted people. We'll ignore them and pretend that we accept. But that's...
We'll pay lip service to them.
So, overarchingly, this episode was amazing. I really enjoyed it. Pacing was still an issue. I think that's probably the one thing that we can really say that was not a negative, but it could have been boosted a little bit with a bit of slower pacing, so there could have been more added to it. And I know I'm really looking forward to this series, and I think from what we've spoken about, I think you're looking forward to it as well.
Yeah.
So we're going to try and do these episodes weekly. I'm hoping that I'm able to edit this down a little bit because it's longer than I was hoping it would be.
Oh wow, we've rambled a bit. But then again, we always do.
But what we're going to try and do is look at the episode that we've watched, aren't we? And then we're going to try and see as the episodes go on whether our theories change about where we think it's going.
As where it appears to be going,
Yeah. To see where we are now in comparison to where we are by the time we get to sort of which
and
world.
It could be that we look back on everything. And it could be that we look back on everything we've said now and go, we were complete idiots. Why didn't we see this?
Or Russell T Davies may see what we're saying and think, we could. I would do that if he's not thought of it already. I'm sure Russell T Davies has thought of way more than me or you ever could.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for watching, and we hope to see you on the next video. Bye.
Yes. See you next time.